Next chapter, chapter 6, is inventory control models. And here are the topics that we'll be discussing. Start off with an introduction as to the types of issues involved in inventories. And then there are two basic questions that we try to answer in inventory management. That will be how much to order and when to order. How much and when. Those are the two basic questions. So we'll be spending a bit of time on how much to order in these sections. And then the safety stock is where we talk about when to order. Then we will look at a couple of standalone topics like single period inventory models and what's called ABC analysis for classification of inventory. Okay. And then the last part of the chapter will be on dependent demand inventory items. And dependent demand inventory items are, generally speaking, raw materials and parts that are needed for the production of the finished goods that we ship out from our plants. So this is the chapter outline. So let's start with a brief introduction to the concept. So inventory management is an extremely important task because quite a large amount of working capital is tied up in inventory, and mismanagement there can cost significant dollar amounts, and therefore it is extremely important to optimize the level of inventory that we need to have to support production. And generally speaking, we have two broad categories of inventory, as I just mentioned: dependent demand inventory and independent demand inventory. The first two items that you see here, raw materials and work in process inventory, which are like subassemblies and parts. So these are dependent demand items because these are required for the production of the end item, which is the finished product. The finished product, the demand for the finished product comes from external sources, from our customers, which is independent of any of our decisions, and therefore this is called independent demand. Whereas demand for these products are directly related to when we schedule production for the finished products, and so these demand for these products depend upon our decision as to when we're going to produce finished goods, and therefore these are called dependent demand items. Now, why do we need inventory? Yeah. We need inventory to keep our production process going. So we do need it. At the same time, having too much of it, because we don't want the production line to starve for parts, and so we want to keep a high level of inventory. But when we do that, then we increase the inventory carrying cost. So there is a fine balance that we have to strike between having too few very low level inventory, which may result in production shutdowns, or very high inventory, which will result in very high inventory holding cost. So low levels of inventory can reduce cost but may result in stockouts and production line having to shut down. Okay. So all organizations will have some type of inventory planning and control system, and some of the components of that is what we're going to be discussing in this chapter. Yeah. So here is the kind of a closed loop system of how inventory control planning and control system works. So you plan on what items to stock and how to get it. Then you have forecasted demand for the parts, and you use that to develop inventory levels, and based on the performance of those inventory levels, which are measured by how much safety, how much stockouts that we end up having, and what is the cost of carrying inventory, then we further fine-tune our plans. So it's a continuous cycle of decision, implementation, feedback, and correction. So here is another formal look at why we keep inventory in stock. The first reason is to serve as a decoupling mechanism. It reduces, that is, decoupling here is to be understood as a buffer between two stages of production. So if you have inventory in between, so if a supplier machine breaks down, okay, the downstream machines need not shut down because there are no parts coming in if you have buffer stock in between. So if you have buffer stock in between, then while the upstream process gets maintained, the downstream process will have enough supplies to keep working, and that's what is meant by decoupling function. Storing resources is when products have seasonal demand and we may not have sufficient capacity during high season, but in low season we may have excess capacity. So it's like shifting or converting capacity into finished products which can then be used during high season. So that is storing resources. So labor can be stored in the form of, or machine capacity can be stored in the form of finished inventory. Now irregular supply and demand again is in uncertainty because there are so many uncertainties in terms of how much the demand will be or whether the supplier will consistently supply parts and inventory on time. So to hedge against uncertainties, we can keep inventory, and this is usually what's called safety stock. Now, quantity discounts is another reason why people keep inventory, and this is especially true when prices fluctuate quite a lot and when offered significant discounts for larger orders, then you place more order than what is immediately required, so you can save in the long run. Now, avoiding stockouts and shortages, that's just I mentioned that. So irregular supply and demand is kind of related to avoiding. If you have irregular supply and demand, that will lead to stockouts and shortages, and to mitigate against that, then we keep inventory. And the two fundamental decisions that we have to make in inventory management is how much to order. That's the quantity decision. What is the quantity that we need to order? And then when you should order. So those are the two things that we will be looking at throughout the chapter. And the major objective in coming up with answers to these two questions, how much to order and when to order, is to minimizing the total inventory related costs. So what costs are affected by these two decisions? That's what we have to look at. You don't have to look at all the costs, but the cost that will be affected by these decisions. Now, cost of the item, that is the unit cost, the material cost, okay, even though it is an important cost, sometimes the decision that we make here may not have an impact on what our vendors will charge per item unless there is quantity discount. If there is quantity discount, then of course the order size will determine the cost of the item. If there is no quantity discount at all, then unit cost of the item is irrelevant. The ordered quantity, it does not determine the unit cost of the item. It's independent. So we can ignore considering this cost because it's not going to be affected by these decisions. Now, cost of ordering is cost of placing one order. Okay, we'll look at it in a little bit. Then cost of carrying inventory, that is holding cost, it's another name. And then cost of stockouts. When stockouts occur, what would be the cost? So what are the factors that go into the cost of placing an order? Okay, so here are the list of items. I won't read them one by one, but these are costs that are related to preparing an order, contract, receipt of material, inspection, quality control, those kinds of things, and also overhead in terms of salaries and building maintenance and so on. So if you so the ordering cost is usually expressed as dollar amount per order. So if you order just one time a year, then that cost will be incurred just one time a year. On the other hand, if you order 10 times in a year, then it will be 10 times that cost per order. So if you want to minimize ordering costs, then you will decrease the number of orders. But what happens when you decrease the number of orders? If you place just one order per year, then you have to place a huge big order, then you end up with too much inventory. And that will end up having increased carrying costs. And the carrying cost, inventory carrying costs, is oftentimes determined as a percentage of the cost of the item, or sometimes it's just simply a dollar amount per unit per year. And a major portion of that cost is the cost of capital tied into the inventory. So because when you keep inventory in stock, then you've paid for it to your vendor, so that dollar amount is locked up in it. And that's the major one, but there are other smaller amounts that go into carrying costs like taxes, insurance for the building, spoilage, theft, and obsolescence. When parts become no longer, technology overtakes the inventory that we have. We no longer need them. We have better technology products. Okay? And then there are overheads in terms of maintaining the warehouse and such. And again, ordering cost is expressed as a dollar amount per order. Carrying cost is expressed as a dollar amount per unit per year, or sometimes it will be expressed as a percentage of cost of the item, 20% of the cost of the item. Okay. That's because the cost of capital that's tied in with the inventory is usually the biggest part of carrying cost. So ordering costs are generally independent of order quantity. It is only how many times you order. The holding cost is directly related to how much inventory that we hold, and the larger the order size, the larger the inventory that we'll be holding. So there is a kind of a internal conflict between these two. So if you order just a few times so that we minimize the ordering cost, your holding cost is going to go up because you will be placing large orders, so you end up with really huge amount of inventory. On the other hand, if you order in small lots so that your inventory level is low and therefore holding cost will be low, then you end up having to order many times, and your ordering cost per year will go up. So that internal conflict will have to be resolved. And that's what we do in what is called economic order quantity.